I'm Michael Barron. I'm the publicity director and I'm an editor at New Directions. I'm here to talk about marketing your translation, um, which is a kind of fascinating thing because you're a sort of diplomat. You're kind of ushering someone into the American market, and there's so many ways to do that that I think are great and worthwhile to know. And there's certainly ones that I've tried out that I'd like to kind of unveil here today. But I want to start by kind of talking about a little bit what is marketing, which might seem like a dim subject to talk about, but I've noticed that when I talk to people about marketing, they don't quite grasp fully what it is. Sometimes people confuse it with publicity, which is more of a public outreach. But I kind of see marketing as like ideas, and like kind of like a Steve Jobs sort of way. Like how can we like really give something pizzazz, and how can we make people really want to read a book, and what are some ways to reach out to different crowds and different people and their interests. Because there's many different types of people that read books, and it's easy to forget that not every reader of a book is part of the book culture. So, the three, to me, the three immediately marketable things about a translation are the book, obviously, the author, and the translator. And sometimes it's good to kind of separate out those three items of what you're trying to market, because if you just bunch it all together, I don't think you can quite get as far outreach if you kind of focus on all three. So I want to talk about how to market yourself as a translator. At New Directions, where I work, we do mostly works in translation. Some people have built quite a reputation as a translator. Susan Bernofsky is one, and George Zertes is another that immediately come to mind. And one thing that I've known about, I've kind of seen that about their work is that there's a sort of authority that they kind of have. If they tell us this person's very important, we're going to lend an ear and listen because we like their work, and they seem to have a grasp of what is important from the culture that they're translating from. Say like Robert Walser is an example. Susan Bernofsky translates this German author, Jenny Erpenbeck, and who has grown here in the United States because because of Susan's translations, and because also she's that good. So if you're a translator starting out, I think or trying to like bring an author into the American market, it's good to know the literature of your adopted language and the literature related to what you translate. By that I mean, if you're bringing in Robert Walser and you can kind of peg him as a part of the whole modernist era of literature, that's good. These are like these key words that you can use to sell a translation to a publisher or to a public. And it's good to also know the translators who are also doing translating from the same language. For German, for instance, besides Susan Bernofsky, there's Kurt Beals, who's another young translator that's touted by Susan and that we have a relationship with, and that kind of like mentor and someone who like really advocates for your work is really helpful. And so I also think it's good to befriend your fellow translators as well, which again seems kind of simple, but it's not. I see some translators who are kind of antagonistic a little bit sometimes towards other translators, and I don't think that's the way to go. I think it's what you should do is kind of figure out who else is translating, who's doing similar work, and kind of like build a small community that way. The next thing I want to talk about is how to market an author, and how does an author fit into an ongoing literary conversation? If you're choosing to translate an author, why are you choosing to why do you feel compelled to translate this author? Why is it that you want to bring him here? Why do you think other people would be interested in reading the works of this author? In one case, we have an author that we're going to be publishing next year who's Indonesian. And one of the key points of him is that he's an artist. He's also a filmmaker. He's also politically engaged, and so his writing kind of captures something I think most people like about translation. This kind of not just glimpse, but like a focus on another part of the world that you can't really get by reading the news. So I think anyone who's reading translations already has an interest in what's going on around the world and global matters. So when the person brought their translation to us, they had this pitch about it being very political. This was the great contemporary Indonesian writer who's, trying to kind of comprehend what's going on in Indonesia and Java, and also is this great filmmaker and is beloved by the intellectual sect in Indonesia. And her translation was really good, and that kind of got us all fired up to want to read the book. And the book is fantastic. It also helps that he's alive. Is the author alive or dead? If you're going to be working with a live author, there's a lot of different things you can do than if you're working with an author who's no longer with us. If you're working with an author, if you're translating someone who's deceased, you kind of want to focus on legacy. And if you're working with an author who's alive, you want to work on trying to build them a name and reputation here. One by getting reviews or getting excerpts placed or short stories or stuff like that. Also, if you're able to do it, try to get some money and try to get that person over here and try to get them events with other authors from the United States and so on to kind of have this, building a name and also building him or her a community in the States that writers can start talking about. If the author has never been translated before, what I recommend doing is to kind of try to build up hype. I would send your translation, even if in raw manuscript form, to authors that you admire, and try to get blurbs. One book I'm working on now is by this Iranian Dutch author named Kader Abdullah, who doesn't have quite a big reputation here, but has a huge reputation in the Netherlands. And so when I was thinking about who I wanted to kind of have Kader teamed up with in my dream event that I would put together, I started thinking about Joseph O'Neill. Because Joseph O'Neill, after doing my research, he spent some time in Iran and obviously wrote Netherlands and now lives in the States. That seems like a good matchup. And I think anyone, if you're working with any language, kind of take some key thoughts about what makes that person a writer and try to figure out who's their American equivalent, and then send that translation to them and see if they say anything. There's absolutely no harm in sending out your work to other authors. It's up to them if they want to get back to you, but if you're going to try a book that's never been, or if you're going to translate an author that's never been here before, or one that you're trying to work up a reputation, maybe they have one or two books and they're slowly gaining momentum, I really feel it's helpful to write a preface and try to place that preface somewhere and try to place it in a journal that has a general reader interest and readership. I don't think that and you guys can throw stones at me about this, but I don't think that placing a preface in a really small and academic journal is going to get you a lot of readers in the public at large. So I definitely think, for instance, we have a Syrian writer, Osama Alamar, and we actually got Lydia Davis to write the preface for it because she discovered him in some small way and just been touting him as this great writer, a great writer of the Arabic miniature writing, and volunteered to write this preface to an author who has no following or fans. He had been published in Noon, and we placed that preface in the New Yorker blog, and all of a sudden review requests came coming in. Penn asked him to be on his panel, and then from there, the New York Times found out about him, found out about his story. He's a refugee from Syria who now drives cabs around in Chicago, and wrote this great profile on him. So now his reputation kind of built just from one preface, and I think that can happen. That anyone's capable of doing that. The nice thing about Paris Review Daily or the Harper's blog or the New Yorker blog, is that you are and eligible to place your preface in those places, and it really does wonders to get a person's name out there and to get people excited. Also, also as a translator, I think it helps also kind of like help the editor or the person in charge of publicity kind of drum up a lot of what publicity that person has had in their home country. You know, if there's big magazines or big authors there that are talking about it, I would send that as well, and then you can kind of build like a sort of portfolio when you send it out to certain people. That this person's just not this unknown person from where they come, but they are this great and wonderful writer. Excerpts are very important as well. To again, really be discerning about where you place these things. A well-placed excerpt can go really far. There's also, if a book is reviewed in like NPR, they not only do they do a review, they also place a first chapter excerpt. There is a program called Dial a Book. They do these first chapter series, and they spread those first chapters out everywhere, and that's a good thing to have out there. When you're sending books out to review, you could say the first chapter is available here. You can read it. Anyone can read it, and that helps kind of get the word out. But again, going back to marketing, those are all kind of basic stuff that most people know. But I want to talk about a program that we've instituted at New Directions with marketing. So I'm the publicity director and an editor, but I'm not the marketing director. I'm the team captain of a marketing team, and there's a big difference to that. So it's not. I work with 3 other people, and we sit down like once every couple of weeks, and we just sort of think of ideas on how we can get a book out there, and we select certain books to do this, and we do these campaigns. And the one we've done most recently is for the Egyptian writer Sonala Ibrahim. We sat down, we were like, how can we make this book and this author bigger here? How can we get people excited? How can we reach different audiences, not just the people who read, Egyptian political literature? And there are people who do that, especially in recent events. So we got to thinking, and we're trying out a few different things that we're excited about. Yesterday, we put up our first ever book trailer. It's a semi-animation with Electric Literature's first sentence animation series. We got this animator to make to use these photos of 1950s Cairo, and he's inspired by the little Viewmasters, from the 70s and 80s, where you put like the little film in, you click, and he made this animation based on those photographs, where you kind of see the view scope, and it click, and it turns to another photo, and you get these great set of photographs through that. But it's animated, and it's kind of engaging. It only lasts a minute, and that's kind of going around on the internet right now and kind of drumming up excitement from various people, which I think is pretty cool. We also went to Little Egypt here in Queens, tried out some of the food, and tried to kind of like, I don't know, get a little feel as close as we could to actually flying out to Cairo, what people eat, or what kind of restaurants, or even look at menus and stuff, just to kind of get a feel for it. Another thing we're doing, which I think I'm really excited about, is we asked an ethnomusicologist to make a sort of mix of 1950s Egyptian music. So that person's putting that together, and we're gonna post that on a website, like a music website with literary tastes. And that person's gonna describe, like, of the 10 people we have on there, like who these people were. Like Layla Murad is like a big or a big music singer in Egypt in that time period. I didn't know this until I started looking into it, and it's exciting. You kind of learn a lot of what of that time period. So it's not just a book, but the book is expanding into in this sort of multimedia that I think everyone can enjoy. Other things we're going to do, we're working with Badoon to do a big event, like a sort of semi-talk on Abdullah's importance in Egypt, but also like we're going to try out Egyptian beer and eat Egyptian snacks and listen to Egyptian music, and just have the book everywhere. And it's kind of like a celebration of not just the author, but also the country, and really imbibe everything that's a part of it. And that's just for Ibrahim. On a previous book, this book that eventually became a New York Times bestseller, it's called The Guest Cat. It's by this Japanese author, Takashi Hiraide. On the cover of the book is a cat, and I didn't realize the power of cats. It's huge. So when we first started sending the book out, we got to certain reviewers, and a reviewer for NPR, one of the only people to review it initially, read it, loved it, reviewed it for NPR. And I guess someone from the main NPR loved the cover and loved the review and read the first chapter and posted it on Facebook on the NPR main page, which has like 5 million followers or something like that. It's a lot of people. And there's this big cover of this cat and then a link to the review. And within like a day, you start seeing people tweet about it. You start seeing people Facebook about it. It got 2,000 likes in 2 hours. You can literally, we were just watching the counter go up. It went on Amazon's bestseller list that afternoon. And then, a couple weeks later, it was on the New York Times bestseller list. We haven't had a bestseller since 1950 something. And it was exciting. And I think it all had to do with this because of a really great cover and a really great review. That can happen. So that brings me to my next point. It's like a really good book design matters. I do see some books, not from our publishing house, but a couple from our publishing house that I don't like. But if I see a book that I don't like the cover, I do judge books by its cover. I will shout that out loud. I do judge. And you should too. You should. If you're a translator, you should have a little bit of say maybe, and ask to see the book cover. If it's kind of stylish, let it be. If it looks good, let it be. I wouldn't interfere too much. Don't give them like your child's painting and say like, this is what I would like as my cover of my book. It means a lot to me. That's not going to sell anything, and that's a bad idea, and that has happened before. So to kind of like bring all this together, again, like I said, you have the translation, you have the book, and you have the author. And in level of importance to me, I think, the translator brings the book. The book kind of creates a reputation, if it's great enough, of the author. And it's ultimately the author that's the most important part of those three, because it's the author that people will want to read the next book that comes out immediately without knowing what the book is. And as your translator, then you start building a reputation of translating this great book. I mean, if you think of like George Zertes, and who translates Laszlo Krasznahorkai, he has this great, huge reputation. He has like 6,000 followers on Twitter. I only have like not even 500. And just because he translates this great author, people are fascinated by what he has to say as a translator because he has such a reputation. There are a lot of translators out there, but there's only a few that have kind of made their name. And I really do feel like this is a time for translators to kind of like become celebrities. And so I think the last thing I want to say is like, you really want to own your authority. You want to like really own the fact that you're a translator and be proud of that. And in order to be proud of that, you have to let that show, not arrogantly. Don't go to people and like push them out of the way and say, no, I'm a translator. I deserve to be. More like, build a good website for yourself. Get online. Be on social media. It's okay to tweet. It's not diminishing your dignity to do that. Or Facebook. Just be engaged. Find out what other people are talking about. Talk about translations that are not yours. I think Susan Bernofsky is really good at that. She has a website called Translationista that she just revamped. The website for it looks great, and she talks about all sorts of things that are translation related. She's sort of a literary activist, so she was a big part in saving the New York Public Library. But she talks about all these awards in French and in Japanese and not just German, which is the language she translates from. But she seems really engaged in that world, in that community. And I think that's really important. You should as well be engaged in that community, because then when you bring something out, you're not a nobody. You're somebody with a reputation, with authority, and with interests that other people might like be curious about. Let's see. I think that's 20 minutes. I'd like to take some questions. I'm contracted to do so. Does anyone have any? Great. Well, thank you for hearing me, and I enjoyed speaking to you.